afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the second research seminar series of Digital Software Engineering Transforming Our Digital Futures. I'm so excited to have our invited speaker, Mr. Jawad Keshtgar. He's a lead business and change analyst at BMI Healthcare, a private healthcare organization. Jawad has been very keen in collaborating with Brunel University for a while and has been giving guest talks in our teaching. So in our, for example, in my software project management, and actually students have admired him. Jawad has been involved in projects involving the digital transformation through his different roles. So today I've asked him to summarize his experiences in working in these different projects. So I invite you all to welcome him. So thanks, Jawad.
No, thanks very much for the kind introduction, Noor, and it's great to be back and appreciate the opportunity to take part in your seminar series, and good afternoon, everyone. So before we begin, just a quick outline into some of the topics we'll be discussing during this presentation. I'll begin with a very short background to myself and my story ever since graduating from Brunel back in 2013. And as Noor mentioned, I'll be touching upon two digital transformation projects which I've been involved with during these past, I would say, 7 to 8 years. And then towards the end, I'll aim for 15-20 minutes for a Q&A session, but by all means, feel free to stop me in between slides if there are any sort of questions. I'm more than happy to answer them as we go along, and that way it just keeps the interaction going. So my story, as I said, I graduated back in 2013, finished my master's in information systems management. And it was at that time, I remember towards the end, the final months of completing my master's dissertation, I must say a huge thank you to Dr. Alan Serrano that gave the opportunity for me to join BTO. And very much, I would say, if it wasn't for that, I probably wouldn't be here or where I am today if it wasn't for that opportunity that Alan sent to me via an email. So I joined BTO in 2013, and this was a very young and energetic startup based in Brunel, based in the Science Park, which I joined. And really looking back at it now, it turned out to be one of the best, or the best career decision that I've made so far in my sort of short career life, simply because it gave me the opportunity to meet amazing people. And back in the day, before COVID, when we were allowed to do some international traveling, I was fortunate enough to work on a few projects across Europe, in Germany, Vienna, and lastly in France, working with the Allianz, part of Allianz as a consultant of BTO. And since May 2019, I've joined BMI Healthcare. I came back to the UK and being involved with a new digital transformation project, which I'll be focusing later on towards the end of the slide. So really to set the scene, as it were, for the presentation, these are some of the questions that I aim to answer. I'll be honest, I probably won't do a good job answering every single one, but I'll do my best. And I just feel, there's no sort of right or wrong answer these days. I think with the pace that digital transformation, and technology is evolving, it's all about brainstorming together and sort of coming to, what works best. And really, that's why I'm really excited to be part of this whole seminar series, because I think there is definitely a lot of insight and value that academics can guide, organization in this sort of new and evolving world of digital transformation projects. So just to, set expectations, I wanted to do 2 different case studies. And I think it's sort of really quite good in terms of giving a contrasting viewpoints of different angles to the digital transformation projects. I mean, firstly, with Allianz, I think I'll be more focusing on the design and implementation side of things. And then when we focus towards the latter part of the presentation with BMI Healthcare, I think it becomes a people process related issue. So I think definitely seeing the different angles involved with digital transformation projects through the lenses of these 2 case studies, I think it's going to be useful that these are all it's not just all technology focused initiatives, but also softer skills like people process definitely come into it as well. So I know this is a slide that Noor asked me to do in terms of my role. So before we talk about Allianz, just wanted to give a brief overview into my role. And I have, through my experience, I have, worked as a business analyst, but I very quickly realized that can mean a lot of different things to different organizations. I've been, say as a business analyst in some companies, and very quickly, realized that I was more project managing rather than, gathering requirements. Or in the case of Allianz, I was, hired as a business analyst, but very quickly found out that I was much more technical and I was more in line with a system analyst. And there has been cases where, I worked on projects as a full-on tester, but, under the umbrella of a BA. So just to debunk and demystify what we mean by a business analyst, I wanted to sort of use the current example, what we mean by a BA at BMI Healthcare. So, moving on, hopefully you can see this slide. It should be familiar to to the project managers out there. So really it's a high-level overview of the product development lifecycle and the various stages in it, or the key stages in it. And yeah, people will be forgiven if they, see BAs as just focusing on one of these silos or one of these phases in the development cycle, predominantly in the design phase, where a lot of organizations, their expectations from a BA is simply to capture or elicit the requirements from end users, document it, and Moscow rate it, and that's all they do. Fortunately, though, at BMI, it means slightly more than that, and it spans a more broader perspective. So that's why I tried to illustrate here with that, the header at the top. And the way I would define it is, I would say we operate a bit more on a strategic level. So any new projects or initiatives, IT projects or initiatives that comes into the business, it touches point to the BA team, which I sort of manage, to make that, I would say almost that scouting, let's say, analysis to make sure that what the business are proposing is in line with our wider IT roadmap and strategy. And, it's not as if they're trying to reinvent the wheel, because a company the size of BMI, we've got around 55 hospitals up and down the UK. There could be cases where, some parts of the organization don't know that, there is existing solutions in place for a very similar request that or challenge they're experiencing. So it's really comes down to the BAs to be the eyes and ears of the organization, analyze these requests and sort of triage them accordingly. And then it then sort of, gets decided whether it is valid as a new project or initiative, or it should be managed more internally via IT service delivery. And typically, all BAs, they are involved in all stages of the life cycle, depending on how big or small the project is. Most projects, I would say they are from the inception all the way to deployment, they're involved in some shape, way, or form. But there are cases where with larger projects, they are the more traditional BAs, where they just, help put the business case together and do the requirements document and then hand over to the development team. But this is, a really sort of unique selling point that I really, love about BMI, the fact that I have worked on projects where I never got to see the end product because, we're just totally siloed in the design phase. So from that perspective, it is a very fortunate, opportunity to be involved end to end, with projects. And the other side of things which I manage, which is the change team, they typically get involved towards the latter stages of the product life cycle, usually towards the end of development. And what we mean here by change team is their prime focus is putting together the learning and training documentations like the user guides, videos, which is a big thing now with this whole remote working, or workbooks, cue cards, to the end users. So hopefully it guides them to know how to use the system in the best possible way. And also webinars, remote webinars via Teams as well is another popular way to help bridge that whole change management, the transition from old to new. So that's what we mean by a BA and sort of my role, which I'm involved. And what I've done is just some of the artifacts and documentations which are typically expected at each stage of the product development lifecycle. So going back to our digital transformation project, I really do like this slide because it sort of shows the global nature and the global transformation project I was part of with Allianz. So when I joined the project first, and this is the ABS project, which stands for Allianz Business System, initially they were really focused in and around Europe. And towards the end, I would say when I started leaving the project towards 2018, they had started to expand in the US and Canada region and also Far East. And a big challenge for them when the whole ABS initiative was launched, almost 10 years ago, was to consolidate all their IT systems or insurance platforms onto one centralized standard system across all of their business units, which are illustrated here on the map. Moving on, a big drive for ABS was to consolidate operating costs, and that's where the strategic program of AMOS, so AMOS was Allianz Managed Operational Services, came into play to help harmonize and consolidate all these operational costs and make sure that everything, all business units across the globe, Europe and elsewhere, are using the same standardized platform. So, it was cost driven, that was one of the main initiatives for ABS, but also it was a changing landscape for many insurance companies. And I still remember when I first joined Allianz, my first week of induction, we were asked by our line manager who we thought in 10 years' time the major competitors would be. And this is, the second largest organization in the world, insurance company in the world, and still sort of thinking that their business model was under threat. So we would have been forgiven thinking it would be your usual suspects, your AXAs, direct lines, and whatever. But actually, we're surprised to find that they were seeing Google and social media as the big threats in the future. And to help illustrate this example is the example I always give is if we think about travel insurance. Back in the day, again, pre-COVID, whenever my friends or family relatives, people that I knew, we wanted to go on holiday, what's the first thing we do? We put a post on Facebook, we probably take a selfie, I'm leaving from this airport, we even take a few pictures throughout our holiday, and also, mention when we come back. So all this is really gold, for the likes of insurance companies, because predominantly the lifeline, the lifeblood is data. Data helps drive all these decisions in terms of the premiums, quotes, whatever. And, companies like Instagram, Facebook, having all this, digital footprint and data at their fingertips really would give them a competitive advantage. Simply because how traditional insurance quotes work in the past is they give you a packaged quote based on pretty much your demographics. They just ask questions about you and that's it. But with, imagine with, all this additional information that Facebook, Instagram, Google can capture, they would know that Mr. John Smith, you always go to your Spanish, resort, in August. You always stay there for 2 weeks. You've never missed a flight, and you seem pretty much a safe and secure customer. So why should Mr. John Smith pay, the same price as everybody else? So with that sort of level of insight, we can see this whole transition from standard quotes or packages to very bespoke quotes, tailored to that individual. So it can, give that or drive that competitive pricing. And that's pretty much what the angle that Allianz was taking, that, it's something that they needed to mitigate. And by consolidating all their, different insurance platforms, which their business units were using, onto one standard instance, it helps, so-called to give that insight or the, to find the golden source of the truth all in one place. So that was another major driver for the ABS project. And how this was rolled out was a completely in-house insurance platform, which we refer to as ABS Core. So ground zero for this, the first version of this insurance platform was in Germany, of course, where Allianz is headquartered, and Austria. And then for all the other business units across Europe and across the globe, they had this, almost, fundamental, the spine of the platform was still ABS Core, but with still, some room for flexibility and customization to allow for, local adaptation. So it's your classic 80-20 rule. The vast majority of the platform was still, standardized based on the, the core infrastructure, or sorry, architecture, and then, some flexibility to adapt it to local needs. So that's how they managed the rollout and, satisfying different needs outside of Germany. And the way the team was structured, they had a big emphasis on communication or handovers, as we refer to, which these black arrows represent. So the functional requirements would usually be done by the business. So us BAs, we wouldn't be out there collecting requirements. All these requirements was already gathered, in the agile to use the agile terminology, by the product owners. And we would get these requirements in a tool very similar to Jira. So we used HB Demand. And it was at that stage where the BAs, they would sort of initially estimate and do high-level analysis of the requirement to make sure, does it follow the ABS philosophy? Is it something achievable within the architecture of ABS Core? And then once they did the initial design documentation and requirements, they would have a handover with the domain leads. So this is, for example, in the insurance world, contract or claims or finance. They would essentially sense check if the design document was, was up to standards and it was in line with the whole ABS way of things. And what made, I would say, that this whole implementation, making sure what the user requested. Sorry, is that a question? Oh. No worries. What made it so successful was with Allianz, they had a very strong design authority. So all designs, functional designs that we worked on would have been overseen by the design authority, and only when they gave the green light and made sure that it's something that ABS score can accommodate, would it then be given the green light to go on for development? And that way we made sure that all the requirements met the criteria, the parameters, allowed by the architecture, and that it wouldn't break the system. And then, usually the BAs would also be involved with smoke testing, which I think we will touch on the next slide. So the whole user acceptance testing paradigm or philosophy was a key, let's say, key driver at Allianz, making sure, and this is the way that they certified that whatever requirements was mentioned by the business met their needs at the end. So they followed this traditional UAT planning, and there was a very heavy emphasis on always internal testing first before we rolled it out to the business. So that's the diagram I tried to illustrate on the top right. So anytime the business analyst did some new functionality or design document, they would have that handover again with the developers. It wouldn't just be an email. They would physically sit next to the developer, explain the business need, explain the whole design. They would, any questions would have been, cleared or clarified then and there. And, that also made sure whatever the developers developed was in line with the documentation. And once that was ready to go, the testers would do a quick test. And in case of any issues, they would just come straight to us, to the BAs, to make sure if a lot of the cases are their test scripts all right, because we did have instances where the functionality worked, but the data wasn't right. Then the way they loaded data in the system wasn't right, so it was more of a user error rather than a system error. So that real emphasis on internal testing put us in good stead, because by the time it hit UAT, we were fairly confident, the functionality would be bug-free and worked as expected, as what the business requirements wanted from the functionality. And typically, this would be a 2 to 3 week process, depending on how big the version release was. And then, so traditionally, this whole process followed a very, old-fashioned waterfall spiral methodology. But certainly towards, the tail end of 2017, certainly 2018, we transitioned into a much more agile, way of development, which is, introducing Scrum. And this certainly wasn't a quick process, I would say. It certainly took us 12 to 18 months to transition from waterfall spiral to the more agile Scrum methodology. And just to give some insight into that timeline, the first 6 months involved, key users being trained and getting certified with Scrum, just to make sure that they had the up-to-date knowledge and best practices. But also, and this is probably I should have mentioned earlier, the whole physical layout of the office changed as well. So we were fortunate enough to have all our developers and testers and BAs in one office building. So we didn't have to sort of communicate with people across different geographic time zones or languages, which can be a barrier in a lot of instances. But we were sort of grouped or huddled in our domains, or you had your testers at the far back of the room, developers in between, and the BAs mixed in and around. So when we did this transition to Scrum, the whole physical layout of the office changed, and we had testers, developers, BAs all sitting in mini teams all together, and sort of making sure that we did talk and communicate, so that the whole process wasn't just a paper exercise. It did transition into physical changes in the whole environment. And we also introduced physical Scrum boards or whiteboards where we had post-it notes, and we would just move it along each of the timelines based on how far down the requirement process we were. So that's pretty much the experience of Allianz in a nutshell. To summarize, I won't go into each and every strength and weaknesses, but I would say definitely one of the big strengths of Allianz was they had a very clear and definitive vision and strategy, what I would say a blue ocean strategy. They saw the disruptors in the market, and they had a very sort of definitive business plan on how to counteract it with the whole rollout or initiative of the ABS. And this was really supported from the top of, the very top, of the organization all the way down. Everyone knew what the vision and mission was. So I would say that was definitely something that came across very clearly whenever you first joined Allianz. And some of the weaknesses were certainly the fact that it was an in-house system. It had its limitations, and because of the architecture, it was, by the time we were working on it in 2018, it was well over 10 years old. It wouldn't be up to date with the, with your Pythons or your latest, programming languages of the day. And also another big hindrance, and one of the main factors why we transitioned from waterfall to agile was version releases were too slow. So usually every 3 to 4 months or quarter, we would aim for a major release. And the business, they just saw this as too slow to react to changes in the market place, and hence why we moved to a more agile approach. So that's pretty much Allianz in a nutshell. I don't know, before I touch on the BMI side, are there any questions, or are you happy for me to continue?
Does anyone have any questions? You can also type them on the chat, by the way.
Brilliant. So I'll crack on then.
Continue.
No worries. So now looking on the BMI side of things. So yeah, Allianz, the reason I focused on that was much from I would say, a design implementation. Now with BMI Healthcare, I'll give some interesting background to it, and it'll be very much focused on the softer side of things, the people process side, which I would say often gets overlooked when we talk about technology projects or digital transformation projects. So we are the largest private healthcare provider in the UK, and I would say when we talk about healthcare, it's in two sort of brackets: primary care and secondary care. So your primary care would be things like your GP or your community care services. But what we do quite unique in the marketplace is we also provide secondary care. So this is your more specialized treatment options like cancer treatment or rehabilitation. So a company, which I'm sure you're all familiar, like Bupa, they operate mainly in the primary care side of things, and we other competitors like ourselves, Nuffield Health and Spire, we also operate in the secondary care side of things. And yeah, as I mentioned before, we've got around 50 odd hospitals up and down the country. That's now, I would say, expanded by a couple now that we've got this whole merger and acquisition with Circle Health. Now, I'm sure you're all familiar with this chart, and I do like it because it illustrates some of the biggest challenges healthcare providers faced during the COVID crisis. And during that crisis, we effectively became an extension to the NHS as an overflow capacity to provide additional beds. And I would say we were certainly one of the very few private healthcare providers that did have the sufficient number of beds to provide that service to the NHS. But also the reason why I like this chart is it also was the catalyst for change. Very quickly, all healthcare providers, including the NHS, we had to adapt and be much more responsive in the way we delivered healthcare to patients. And in a way, one of the few good things that came out of the COVID crisis was it catalyzed the whole digital transformation agenda, within our organization, and it really drove people and people, both patients and also doctors working with us to work in a very new way. And to illustrate this, I've sort of put it in 4 distinct categories. But again, I really do like this quote from Charles Darwin that it's not the most profitable or intelligent organizations that survive, but the ones most responsive to change. And I would like to think that we did quite well on that, responding to the changes and challenges that we were faced. One major change, which really did challenge the whole traditional business model that we operated, was a lot of our doctors and patients, they were very hesitant, for obvious reasons, to have face-to-face consultations or come physically to us to receive treatment or healthcare. So that was a really major shock to the way that we operated, and we had to be we really quickly had to adapt to still provide the same level and same quality of healthcare, but in a very dynamic and remote way. So one way we did that, focusing on doctors, was we very quickly provided an in-house version of a clinician app. So what this essentially provided was the same IT systems that they would use to book patients or manage patients, triage patients. And you often see GPs or doctors typing away at a computer screen. So before, the only way to have access to those systems was if doctors were physically present at our sites. So one, I would say, quite proud achievement of ours, of our IT team, was we developed very quickly a mobile app which allowed doctors to still have all this patient data and still manage patients on with their fingertips at the convenience of their mobile phones. And this really as well set the scene for potentially other collaborative models such as SaaS, software as a service. Now I know in the traditional sense, SaaS models often is something that's monetizable, but in our case it's more from a data point of view. It's something that a service we provide potentially free. That's one of the arguments to be made, that we provide the service free of charge to clinicians and doctors. But in return, what we get is we get control of that whole patient data, because a unique, I would say, relationship that we have with doctors is they're not internally employed, they're all external to the organization. So they are almost like, private contractors coming and providing a service to us. And a lot of these doctors, they pay mini fortune to use practice, manager applications to manage, their own patients and the patient care pathway. So by providing something for free, it's a win-win situation, both for doctors and for us as an organization. Also, collaboration tools, which sort of links in with remote consultations. As I said, a lot of our patients, and including doctors, they didn't want to be seen face-to-face physically. So this is where, we did virtual consultations. It's fast becoming, I would say, the norm rather than the exception. So we started via telephone. It wasn't very fancy in the initial stages, just because of all the security and making sure that confidentiality, everything was maintained. But once we got to grips and allowed to have a secure portal to undertake these video consultations, these are now fast becoming the norm. And quite surprisingly, patients also prefer that rather than the the commute that they have to do for just a 10-15-minute checkup, follow-up with us. So that's some of the changes that certainly COVID catalyzed, and some of the changes that we had to adapt to with COVID. But also another big change is, as I mentioned earlier, with our recent merger and acquisition with Circle Health, we have new owners, and they are backed by American healthcare providers. And as I'm sure a lot of you are familiar, the business model, certainly in terms of healthcare in the US, is very different to that of the UK. The obvious and the most glaring difference is the fact that they don't have this concept of a national health service, that's free of charge. Everything is private, and even from one state to the other, the healthcare provided can be can be very different, depending on which state you live in. So that's one of the biggest differences, from our, let's say, new owners wanting to operate in the UK marketplace, simply because due to the fact that we've got a national, healthcare service free of charge, there are some very strict compliance or governance regulations that we need to abide by, and just some of the obvious ones I've mentioned here. So regarding reporting, all private healthcare providers have to provide very clear and transparent breakdown of all the costs associated for providing treatments to patients, and that's from your very first consultation all the way to treatment and interventions. All these costs need to be provided in advance to the patients to ensure that they're making informed decisions. And again, one of the regulatory bodies for this is the Private Healthcare Information Network, that we need to publish all our sort of breakdown of our costs. I mentioned the NHS earlier during the presentation. So a lot of our customers are not private, they are NHS. So the NHS, whenever they get sort of overwhelmed, they use us as an overflow capacity. So we do see quite a large number of NHS patients, and with NHS patients, we need to ensure that from the time or from the moment they are referred all the way to treatment, we need to guarantee it's done within 18 weeks. And if it's not, then we risk, getting fined or penalized for it financially. So that's another, strict process that we need to, keep our eyes on the ball and, provide tracking and reporting at each stage. Because also, if the reporting quality is not good enough, we don't get reimbursed from the NHS for the services that we provide to their patients. And finally, another big difference is what I call non-linear patient healthcare. So traditionally in the US, a patient, they would go to one specific healthcare provider, and from start to finish, they will have their treatment with that one institution. Here in the UK, it's very different. A patient can sort of jump in at any point of the patient journey. So not necessarily at the beginning, but sometimes in the middle, or even for things like second opinions or any follow-up treatments that they need. They probably weren't satisfied with the NHS, they come to us. So that's what we mean by non-linear, and we need to make sure that whatever system that we're using accommodates for that, and is hooked up to the right sort of I would say government information networks, such as GPs, such as the NHS. So all that demographic information can be communicated. And one big initiative to standardize this, I don't know if you're familiar, is HL7. So that's a
Sorry, Jawad. I think you're muted. So, yeah.
Can you hear me now? Is that
yes,
better?
Yes, we can.
Oh, sorry for that. How long was I on mute for?
Just a few minutes, Jawad, not many.
Oh, apologies for that. So what was the last thing that everyone heard, just so I know?
I think we have seen that.
You've seen this, yeah?
Yes,
okay.
I believe so.
Okay, so you haven't missed too much. So no. Just to finish off, I just want to say these are some of the new challenges faced when we are talking about digital transformation journey, and when we're looking at potential owners to operate in the UK, let's say, marketplace. There is, very strict criteria they need to comply with before it's approved. So it's not a simple case of going off the shelf and just buying any old package. And just to summarize, all these changes, of course, brings with it, a lot of challenges. Obviously, doctors or old people people who are with us for long periods of time, they don't like the new ways of working. We have consultants who still are adamant to see their patients face to face. And these are just some of the hurdles that we need to address, and it's a much more change management initiative rather than a technology side. But at the same time, whereas with Allianz, perhaps there was this very clear vision and mission, I think due to COVID and this recent merger and acquisition, we're still almost finding our feet in terms of understanding how is the best way to proceed and how we want to embark on this quite large digital transformation journey. But one good thing I would say is on the plus side is there are a wealth of commercially available products out there. So if for whatever reason the existing solution by our American back providers is not deemed let's say, appropriate, there's different options that we can definitely utilize. And there is a lot of exciting developments happening in the electronic healthcare landscape. And the good thing about, having this digital transformation agenda now is, especially following the COVID crisis, a lot of healthcare providers have realized that they need to be innovative and think in a different way in how they provide and deliver healthcare to patients. And finally, when I mentioned a tried and tested technology, at least if we do decide to go with the existing solution that has worked well in the US by US owners, it has, let's say, proven successful over there. So at least that way we have, let's say, a good sort of positive, successful case example if we want to utilize or embed in the UK. So that, in short, is a breakdown of contrasting projects that I've been involved with, and I hope I'm on time to have any questions or any particular slides you want me to go back to. Feel free to mention.
Thank you very much, Jawad. Now I would like the audience to ask you any questions. So Alan Serrano, please.
Thank you, Nora. Thank you, Jawad, for such a comprehensive presentation. I really enjoyed, and it's really nice to see how, for the people who were not at the beginning, Jawad was one of our students. I had the pleasure to be in contact with him. So it's fantastic to see how much you have developed and grown since then, Jawad. It's very nice. It's very nice to see.
I had a good mentor, Alan.
Nothing. All the credit is to you guys. That's fantastic. Knowing a bit your background, Jawad. By the way, I mean, maybe afterwards we can have a quick chat. It would be nice to stay a bit longer because of that as well, Jawad. So don't leave me. Try to talk to you some. So the question to you and for everybody else, again, for the audience now here is knowing a bit your background, and I know that you started with BTO, and BTO was this organization we were trying to look into linking academia with enterprises, right? That was our the thing that we're doing there. So now you have gone through the whole trip. My question is, what do you think, in your experience to what you are right now in the different areas that you have been working in this transformation, what do you think that there are the opportunities that lies for academics, for collaboration with academia? So in all these bits that you have there, what do you think that they are the areas where are more opportunities for us academics to collaborate in these kind of things?
Yeah,
thank you.
No, thanks, Alan, and very, very valid question. And even in my bio, if you see, it's certainly an area which I'm very passionate about. A lot of it comes down to lack of education, I would say. And we were just discussing with Noor before the talk, a few minutes before we started. A lot of organizations or CIOs, which I've been lucky enough to work with, they just go with your usual suspects like your Gartners, Forresters, based on their brand reputation. I mean, they never sort of think or have a second thought for universities, simply because as well, they probably don't even know that such insights or services is provided. And even with my bosses as well, I am the one saying that, okay, well, there is, another avenue to explore here with universities, things and it's something that has never crossed their mind. So I think certainly that awareness or education needs to be done because simply, your Gartners and Forresters are the first thing that comes to mind. But also, I would say there's this false belief that these organizations come with a wealth of experience and, just because they charge a fortune, they know what they're talking about. And I'll give you a very perfect example. When I first started with BMI, we asked for, let's say, the best in class, of what a healthcare, provider should provide, the services they should provide. And what we got from one of these consultancies was a very high level generic, let's say, business model that could be applied to anything. It wasn't specific. So I would say definitely there's that sort of wrong mentality that it's only consultancies that have all the answers and not necessarily considering other avenues like academia. So I think it's certainly something that I've made it my mission to educate, but I also hope that you as academics, you also sort of raise your voices as well and have these opportunities with organizations to inform them, because as well, as we discussed when I was working with BTO, we provide primary sources of research, whereas these other organizations, they really operate in terms of secondary research. They just regurgitate what academics do, but just present it in very fancy and colorful ways. So I think, so those are the two elements I would say.
I'm cautious of time. Does anyone have any other questions for Jawad?
No, I guess I did a good job.
Yeah, there are questions. Rumiana, please.
Just a quick question, but thank you very much for the talk, though. It was really interesting. So my question is supposed to relate it a bit to the one of Alan. So you mentioned security just briefly during your BMI Healthcare use case, and you just a bit brushed it aside. Said once you made sure that everything is secure, like we managed to really migrate. So can you a bit elaborate on that? Like how? Absolutely. Are there any in-house processes in place to ensure that it's secure? That's yet another thing that you're just offloading to consultancy, for example, to provide you with the stress testing and the insurance that it's actually what you're providing, it's secure, or you have process in place?
Yeah, no, a very good question, and thank you for asking. And I'll just, just refer back to this slide. So no, it's completely an in-house process, and it's certainly a task that the BAs undertake for any new initiative. And I would say definitely the GDPR back in 2018 was the catalyst. So what happened just before when I joined, we had a dedicated information governance department within BMI, and they oversee all aspects. So anything to do with data or new IT systems, communicating with other systems, we need to get sign off from our information governance team before the project, goes anywhere near go live or deployment. So what we do is one of the tasks, mandatory tasks that all BAs have to complete is what we call a Dpia form, so data protection information form. And this gets reviewed by our IG team. They will come back with a whole host of questions, of course, in line with the Data Protection Act and, different legislations. And we often, not we, but we then go back to the supplier or to the customer and ask them, okay, how can you answer these questions? How can you ensure that data confidentiality is being maintained? And in some cases, we have to sign maybe data sharing agreements with different suppliers or parties. So it is a very rigorous process, and we do have a dedicated team that monitors this, and all projects, new initiatives, IT projects, have to have that sign off first before go live. So it's a very, I would say, well-drilled process. I hope that answers it.
Yeah, no, thank you. Very insightful.
Yeah.
Anyone?
Yeah.
There's a couple of minutes for more questions. So if anyone gets encouraged.
I have a question.
Yes.
Someone raised their hand. Shall I wait after?
It's your turn, Mohammed.
Okay, sure.
Yeah.
So, I mean, as you mentioned, the healthcare is heavily regulated by compliance and regulation. So how did you find the challenge with the balance between keeping moving on quickly with the pandemic, everything going on, while keeping that in place?
Yeah, very good question. Very good question. I'll be honest. In some cases, we sort of in part had to fast track that. So usually what happens is our IG team, they have quite an extensive backlog of documents to review. But if it's like the COVID, it's something urgent, it goes straight to their attention, and even though it might be the bottom of their pile, it's something that they bring quite close to the top, and approval is done and dusted. And again, back in COVID, before we went to lockdown, we would sit together with the IG team. We would all be on one floor. So it was literally a case of maybe having a 1 hour, 2 hour session with them. Or even what they would do, they would join the call directly with the suppliers. They would ask for, on the spot, all these certifications like your ISO 2001 and, cybernetics certification. They would have a sort of a to-do list for the suppliers, and then they would provide it very quickly. So rather than the bureaucratic, passing of document from one person to the other, they sort of bypass that process, and we would just, have straight talk and interaction directly with the supplier with our IG team present. And that sort of really did help us to move in a much more agile and quicker way.
That's great. Thank you very much.
Kathy, you have your hand raised.
Yeah. Yeah, thanks, Noor. I want to pick up on the governance references that you've made to. So you've mentioned that you have an information governance department in your organisation. I've recently started teaching a new course on ethics and governance. And while most organisations seem to have some kind of department that deals with governance because they're concerned with regulatory issues and so on, and not falling foul of those, I wonder whether you also have an ethics department that deals with that, or whether, like many of the organisations I've come across, there isn't a specific department that deals with those things.
No, thanks very much. I'll be open and honest. Not to my knowledge do we have a dedicated ethics department. However, I think this raises a very interesting question. Just to give you an example, again, let's take COVID as an example. This whole, as you know, by the government, we're all being encouraged to take the vaccine. And understandably, there are, quite, certain areas of the organization, people within the organization who feel one way or the other. And this, again, raises some of these ethical concerns in terms of should your employer be, I wouldn't say forcing, but encouraging, you or have the power to sort of take the vaccine or not, what sort of ethical questions does that raise? So I would say because of, such, queries coming up, it's currently managed, by HR team, generically, but I think moving forwards, it could be an area of development, not just for our organization, but a lot of other organizations, if these sort of questions do crop up.
All right, thank you.
Thanks.
Any more questions? Maybe I have a question, and you've mentioned you've talked a bit about the architecture of your systems. You've mentioned that you are using software as a service. You said you're using components off the shelf or already built components. But how do you manage actually having an architecture with, first of all, do you have architects? Because I don't see architects as part of your, development. But as well, yeah, you have to manage integrate all of these components of the shelf, ensure that the non-functional requirements or the, things like performance, etc. are as well satisfied in your overall system. So who's responsible for that, and how do you do it?
No, good question. And I would say it's similar to the diagram I showed. I think it was, I'll just show you with the handover. So a bit like this sort of organization structure. So all our design documentation gets reviewed by our, I would say, chief architect. And he's the one who's got pretty much the whole oversight of how all our various, IT systems interact and talk with each other, not just internally, but externally to other sort of networks, like the NHS and so on. And he is the main, let's say, person in terms of seeking approval and, giving the green light whether or not the project, proposed by the business, the IT system can talk, and integrate with our existing architecture or not. So thankfully, I would say, unlike Allianz, we definitely don't operate in that sort of technical domain. And we just give that documentation or the request from the business to our developers. They review, well, when I say they, it's our chief architect who reviews, and any open questions or points, he comments on them, and we just take that back to the customer. Now, in certain cases, when it's just too much of a technical language, again, our technical architect, they will have a one-to-one session or webinar or meeting with their counterpart on the supplier side, and they would just talk in their own coded language and come to some sort of agreement. But yeah, all these projects, it also funnels through the chief architect before it gets implemented.
Thank you very much. Actually, now that we've come to an end, I would like to really thank you, Jawad. I think your talks are so exciting, and many of us, I think, academics want to keep in touch with you, and
likewise,
yes, and take these collaborations further if we can. So I would like to ask everybody to thank you. I'm receiving emails, so thank Jawad for his talk.
thanks for the opportunity.
Yeah, so just a quick mentioning that we are having our next talk on the 10th of March. Maybe Rumiana, you want to, Rumiana is organizing the talk. So we also invite you to come and attend on the 10th of March.
Yeah, so the talk will be on 10th of March. We have the speaker will be academic from University of Massachusetts, Boston, and the talk will be on GPO verification.
So thank you.
Thank you.